Well, I wanted to make this channel Atheism Light because there's a multitude of different types of personalities online and in podcasts that claim to be, and I'm sure they are, but they claim to represent atheism, critical thinking, free thinkers, if you will, etc. And one thing that I've noticed that at least I don't really enjoy necessarily being associated with when I consider myself and think of myself as an atheist, and that is somewhat of an air of condescension that's present, somewhat of an air of, well, I'm a free thinker, I actually think, I'm actually critical. And I think that's, while I certainly agree that atheism allows you to open yourself up to a line of thinking that devout evangelicals or fundamentalists of any religion will not allow themselves to enter into, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're intellectually superior or even that you're necessarily logically superior. Now maybe you believe things that scientific consensus happens to support or whatever, but it doesn't necessarily mean that your reasoning skills are sharper, etc. It just means that you're able to have you're able to remove a filter from your worldview that people of faith, especially devout people of faith, have trouble removing. And maybe it's because they don't want to, maybe it's because they can't, or maybe it's both. But I want to make a channel for people who are legitimately just concerned or interested in, maybe you're a devout Christian and you just want to know some things that atheists think, so that when and if someone that's in your life that you care about is dabbling in atheism, you can say, hey, well, I watched this video or I watched this channel and I know what this one guy says that was interesting and fundamental to them. I don't actually have a problem with that because I'm not trying to bring down or to disassemble the church or any fundamental world belief. All I'm trying to do is give people who are interested and who are open-minded and who are considering removing the lens of religion or of faith from their life, a couple of places that at least I have found interesting along the way. So the only thing I would ask is that, as much as I will not condemn or be judgmental or rude towards people of faith, I ask the same if you are a person of faith and you're watching this video. If you're going to leave a comment, I ask that you look into what kind of comment you're going to leave and what is your motivation for leaving it. And I'm going to let you know up front that my assumption is going to be, if you leave a really mean and negative one, my assumption is going to be that it's actually because you're afraid that you also don't believe, and I represent to you a possible future for yourself, and that terrifies you. So why did I become an atheist? I would say that I became an atheist simply because I stopped believing. And that's a very short explanation, but it's actually the truth. I stopped believing before I even knew why. Because I was actually very devout, very, very well read. I'm one of the few evangelicals that's actually read the whole Bible and had read the whole Bible while I was an evangelical. Not in the years afterwards to try to pick it apart, but literally while I believed, I read the Bible from front to back, read the New Testament, the Old Testament, etc. I knew all the weird stories that were back there. Again, not to try to pick religion apart, but because if this was actually the book that was the Word of God, then yeah, you should read it. You should know what's in it. I was very active in my youth group, outspoken. I was the kind of person that people came to when there was something wrong. Will you pray for us? Pray for the situation. What should we do? And I was respected both by young and by my peers, and even people who lived, quote unquote, even youth who lived sinful lives. When something happened, they would come to me and be like, well, you're a strong person of faith. Like, what should I do? So I was respected. And I was 18 years old, and I was praying one night, and the bottom just fell out from underneath me. My heart told me, Jonathan, you don't believe this anymore. And it was earth-shattering because it was my worldview. It was everything. It made me scared of hell, scared of losing my family, scared of losing my purpose, scared of losing, everything that Christians or evangelicals, fundamentalists say will happen to you if you don't believe in God. I was scared was going to happen to me. Damnation, no purpose, lost, devoid of happiness, devoid of joy. And to be honest with you, for a long time, I was devoid of happiness and joy. And it's because I was so worried that I was going to not have the other things. It was not so much that there weren't joyous things that happened in my life. It was really more that I was terrified that I was going to die and burn in hell. And so I didn't believe long before I didn't want to believe anymore. In fact, up until just a few years ago, I still wanted to believe, and I don't anymore. And it's not that I had an aha moment per se, but I picked up little things along the way, and some of them I didn't even want to pick up and didn't even want to learn at the time because I still wanted to return to the faith. I just couldn't. I couldn't believe anymore. But some things that I found interesting that I'd like to explore along the way, aside from just the philosophy and the theology and the doctrine of Christianity, I think are things that tend to be more, not even necessarily scientific, but more historical. Things that I think the average evangelical, the average fundamentalist does not know where the Bible really comes from. I think to them it's this sacred text that has been hand wrapped in this very sterile hands of God and just carried across and through time. But I think as I've learned more and more about the Bible, about its origin, about the origin of the Israelite people, and you set it in reality, in a real place, in a real time, and you actually picture these early Bronze Age polytheists, not just in some piece of artwork by some Renaissance painter somewhere in Italy in a church, but you think of them in a physical place on a hilltop in the ancient Near East, in an open door place of worship, on an altar with bull's horns, which is in the Bible, altar with bull's horns, chanting sacred incantations, taking a ritually cleaned animal and draining its lifeblood, offering it as a sacrifice to Yahweh, where the Lord smells the smell of this burning flesh, this burning real creature. And it says this in the Bible, and the aroma was pleasing to the Lord. Just imagine that is the God that you in 2020 worship. It's the same God. This Iron Age character that takes joy and satisfaction in the smell of an innocent animal's blood being burnt on a fire as people dance and sing and do incantations on a mountaintop in Judea in an open air place of worship. That is your deity. Oh, he's changed since. Why would he have changed since then? Oh, well, it's, Jesus was the new covenant. And it's like, okay, so God had some sort of like philosophical reckoning? Like, no, that is your God. That is your person of worship. And you say, well, maybe, but Jesus represented that we didn't need that anymore. And I'm not here to attack you personally. I'm just saying, for me, the realization that that this is actually the source where the Bible and this whole entire stream of faith comes from. And I would posit to you that it's not. The things that make the Bible true have nothing to do with the God of the Bible. It has to do with the amount of effort and philosophical outpouring of human thought that has gone into the creation of the philosophy of the Bible, and especially the New Testament and New Testament doctrine that has made anything that could be considered to be true of the Bible. So things that I'd like for us to explore as this channel gets going, the concept of whether or not when people say they have a personal experience with Christ, what does that mean? What do you mean by that? Because who are you to question whether or not what I say is real about my personal experience with Jesus Christ? And to which I would say, well, why don't you describe it, and I'll tell you if that sounds legitimate to me, and that sounds like something I'm interested in. You're right, I can't tell you necessarily what you experience, but I can tell you whether or not what you're describing sounds like something I want to experience. That's like a person could tell you that they have a wonderful time competing in a triathlon, a real one, not a short one. And they could describe how it gives them this wonderful sensation. But if they start to describe how on mile 104 of the bike ride or something, their entire body cramps up to where they're in sheer agony, but the agony hurts so good they love it, I will make the decision for myself that that's probably not an experience that I personally want to experience. Similarly, if someone has a real relationship with Christ, I can decide based off of what they tell me that means, whether or not I think that's real enough for me to pursue it as well. I think the history of the true history of the ancient Near East, I was struck in college by how similar the books of the poetic books and the Psalms and the historical chronicles of the Bible, how similar they were to other ancient Near East texts. So as a fundamentalist, you're brought up to believe the Bible is exceptional, but then whenever you read other contemporary works of literature from the same time, you realize real quickly that the Bible is not exceptional. Even whenever it talks about how Jesus or God handmade King David in his mother's womb. Well, there's very similar things like that in Assyrian mythology about how Assyria's gods made their kings and fashioned them and made them and made the lands fall prostrate before them, etc., etc. Evolution, while I'm not a biologist or a paleontologist or anything like that, I think it'll be worth looking into just some simple things that people say, where are the transitionary fossils? Well, they're there. They are there. The transitionary fossils are there, or transitional, whatever you want to call them. The overall history of the Bible, who wrote it, when, why, and in line with looking at the history of the Bible, I also think it's worthwhile to consider what lenses are you using to read the Bible. Because if it's presented to you, here's this thing, it's divine, it's written by God, there's no errors in it. Anything that you think is an error, it's really your puny human logic, and it's your lack of ability to understand the great mysteries of God. That's why if you look at the Bible that way, then you're right. You will only see it as this perfect literary story that goes from beginning to end, and it's all interconnected and interwoven, and it's flawless. If you pretend to remove that lens for just a little while, just for fun, and you decide to read the Bible critically, consider some of the things that almost all of scholarship believes about the Bible, except for fundamentalist Bible training centers, so to speak. And many of these people themselves are Christians. They've made peace with what they consider to be the errors in the Bible. Doesn't mean they don't believe it. But once you begin to peel that onion back, you realize that the Bible is not what it was pitched to you as. And I think that'll be interesting. And then I think the actual archaeological history of Israel itself is interesting and worth looking into. And then finally, I'd like to begin to consider what strikes me as interesting is I'll watch some atheists on YouTube or listen to their podcasts, and as much as they rail against organized religion and against Christianity, they'll turn around and they'll say things that make it clear that they believe in some other sort of ideology, be it a political ideology, or whatever, and they'll make claims that are arguably equally as baseless or equally as one-sided and devoid of necessarily critical thought. And so that's what I would like to rail against, or not rail against, but I would like to make this video about is if you're going to say that you apply quote-unquote free thinking and logic and reasoning, then you should do a good job at making sure that doesn't apply only to your views on religion or faith, but that they apply to, if you say you're a capitalist, or you say you're a conservative, or you say that you're a liberal, and you say that you believe in democratic socialism, whatever, like, you should do your best to make peace, even if it means bridging across whatever political aisles. Make peace and make all of your beliefs reconciled with each other. And I'm not going to tell you what those beliefs should necessarily be, but I think we'll talk about some things that I find to be equally hypocritical of both political parties in this country, for example, but above and beyond just political parties, worldviews and ideologies. So that's what I hope to do with this channel. Thank you.